Hi, this is Kamala Murphy, and you are listening to the Heart and Chutzpah podcast, where we talk about giving ourselves permission or having the chutzpah to just claim a right to live really juicy, luscious lives. With our big hearts, we're going to face love and loss, heartache and healing. We'll fall down and rise up again. And through it all, we'll develop our heart and our chutzpah, and we'll find our way to our own unique, luscious, and amazing life. Thank you for joining me. Enjoy this episode. Hi, everyone. This is Kamala Murphy. Welcome to this episode of the Heart and Chutzpah podcast. So glad that you're here. And I'm really excited because today I have a really exciting guest to introduce you to. Her name is Dr. Elizabeth Michas. I Zoom met her about a year ago, and I started to hear her speak about heartbreak and the brain science of healing heartbreak. And I just got chills. So I'm excited to have Dr. Elizabeth here, and welcome to our listeners. Welcome to you, Dr. Elizabeth Michas. So glad you're here.
Oh, it's so good to be here, Kamala. Thank you.
Yeah. So let me share a little bit about Dr. Elizabeth. And she is a clinical psychologist, a brain-based coach, speaker, author of several books, including the upcoming, wait for it, LoveStuck, The Neuroscience of Healing Heartbreak, which is just seriously, I'm getting chills just thinking about this. So Dr. Elizabeth is also the founder and CEO of MindWorks Psychology. She's trained and certified hundreds of mental health professionals in emotional pain intervention, which is her own applied clinical neuroscience system. So that's really exciting. She's specialized in clinical and neuropsychology and is an expert in the neuropsychology of rapid resolution of anxiety, trauma, addiction, grief, and heartbreak. Dr. Elizabeth has made it her life mission to illuminate the neuroscience of change and transformation so she can help people rapidly recover from emotional pain and optimize their brains for life and love. So exciting. And as we know, oftentimes the wounds that we have in our lives become our gifts and lead us to something new, or our mess becomes our message. And Dr. Elizabeth is, well, she's come to this LoveStuck and all of the emotional pain through her own life experience. So let's start there, Dr. Elizabeth. I would just love to have you share with the listeners, what brought you to especially LoveStuck and heartbreak.
Yeah, I'd love to tell you the story.
Yeah.
I want to start with my background. So I'm from a big Greek, Italian, Russian, Ukrainian family. And my father is a first-generation American, and he's also a neuropsychiatrist. So I've worked with him for almost 3 decades. So I actually got into the psychology business. We sort of joke. It's like, well, we didn't have a Greek restaurant in the family, so we all kind of worked in medicine and in a mental health clinic. And his motto,
the family business, right?
Yeah, that's the family business. We're all doctors. So, my dad passed down this motto to his children, which was school, study, success. And we kind of all did that. I was the oldest, so I started. And then, it was a formula that worked for us. I did clinical psychology and got my PhD. And then so did my younger sister. And then both my brothers became medical doctors like my father. But they went into surgery. They're skilled surgeons that work as an OBGYN and then an orthopedic surgeon. So in grad school, you work hard. I published articles and went to conferences, and I taught at the university level undergraduates. And then I acquired this specialized training that I told you about, the neuropsychology. And I did lots of research plus a dissertation, which back in 1989, when I defended it, was in a newly emerging field of study, which was called adult attachment styles. So
Huh.
this is all about like how we were loved before the age of 3 might determine how we emotionally respond to a romantic breakup as a college student. So
Oh,
lots of
wow.
research and dissertations are done on college students because they're there and
Right.
need to collect data
They're the
and,
guinea
and
pigs,
get
right?
the education. Yeah, it's practical, but hey,
Yeah.
it was something I was really interested in at the time because some people rebound quite quickly and other people kind of, have problems. And um, then I went on, I landed a prestigious internship at the New York Hospital Cornell Medical Center after grad school. That was part of my training. It was under the Westchester division, and it was a mecca of study for the treatment of borderline personality, then
Mm.
headed by the medical director, Otto Kernberg. He actually coined the term borderline personality organization. And if you know
Oh,
anything about borderline personality, they really struggle with intense fears of abandonment and
mhm.
extreme emotional reactivity. They have identity problems, and a lot of them even have self-injurious behavior that would often put people into the hospital. So we were a tertiary care center there in New York for lots of people
Wow.
that weren't
May I
getting
interrupt
effective
you just a
treatment.
moment? Because when I was doing my counseling studies, there was often a thing, we don't want to work with the borderlines because
Yeah,
they're the
exactly.
hardest and almost
The
impossible
hardest.
to not cure, but really help. So this is really fascinating, Elizabeth.
Yeah,
I
so
didn't know
that was
that.
my starting point. So you can only
Wow.
imagine the hardest to treat. Like you said, no therapist really wants to work with them. And yet I got specialized training by renowned psychiatrists and neuropsychologists and psychologists. They were publishing books and doing the research and had all this evidence-based therapy and assessments for this is how you do it. This is how they can be
Wow.
treated. So I even
Wow.
had this like unexpected opportunity to be trained by Marsha Lenahan, who's a psychologist that she founded the dialectical behavioral therapy movement, the DBT for borderline personality, which was a skills-based approach, to give people skills, not pills, to kind of help them. And so she came to New York from Washington State, where she was a professor on a book sabbatical. She was getting ready to launch her book.
Oh,
And so there at New York Hospital, I was part of pioneering the use of this dialectical behavioral therapy on a more outpatient treatment model to keep borderlines out of the hospital, get them treated. And so we taught them all kinds of things about how to regulate emotions and tolerate distress and have more interpersonal effectiveness. And then it was also a time when mindfulness practice was just starting to be integrated with what we do as therapists now.
mhm.
Again, that was almost 30 years ago. So you can see how much it has
Time
changed.
flies, right?
Yeah, but what was so neat about it is I was part of this, evidence-based gold standard treatment as it evolved. And then I got to see what was working with clients. And, it really turns out that these skills-based changes, we now understand so much more about how they're brain healing, especially in key areas and systems of the brain that are involved in emotional pain. And, when I got home, I moved back to Florida. Living in New York was really expensive.
Yeah.
And I was able to direct an inpatient unit of a psychiatric treatment center because the psychologist there wanted to leave to have her children. So,
Mhm.
there I was. She said, okay, you can program direct this 48 bed inpatient unit. And, I went to work, as a psychologist there, leading a team of people and program directing, getting to use some of the things I learned on internship, how we could use that for effective treatment in a short-term unit because you don't have a lot of time with people. They come in, you diagnose them, and then they're discharged. So
Right.
we wanted to, have groups and things that they could have some skills that they could go home with.
Right. Right.
And, so that was just part of my beginning to be a psychologist and use what I'd learned in practice. And then I got married and decided to stay in Florida. I got pregnant on the honeymoon, and
Oh,
my,
wow.
you know, in Greece, and
Yeah.
you know, so about
Well,
less
that
than a year
explains it,
later,
doesn't it?
there I am. And then about 3 years after that, in 1997, I had my second child, Larissa. She's was 6 weeks old, and I was still on maternity leave, and my whole life changed. I found my 3-year-old daughter, Elisa's nose wouldn't stop running. And a few weeks later, I noticed a lump on her neck. And so I begged the pediatrician on call, do something more than just change the antibiotic. This isn't right, And I also saw that her eye looked bigger than the other one. And, so he took a CT, and it showed actually a solid mass in her sinus cavity.
Wow.
So that evening, I packed up my minivan and my husband and our 2 children, and we drove to University of Florida Shands Hospital. It's a children's hospital. It was about 5 hours away from where I live in Fort Walton Beach, Destin, Florida. And little did I realize then that we were going to be there for most of the next year. And
Wow.
yeah, so it was just really, really devastating. Elise underwent a biopsy of the mass in her sinus cavity, and it was cancer, and it was an neuroblastoma, very rare cancer for children. So they really didn't know how to treat it, Kamala. She went through chemo, and then we went home briefly, and 6 weeks of radiation. And then eventually they wanted to do a stem cell transplant, like transplanting her other good cells to hopefully eradicate the cancer. And so we returned home about 3 weeks before the Thanksgiving holiday, and I put up the tree, and she had such a good response. We were just anticipating Christmas, and I was putting together this Barbie Jeep and getting it charged up for Christmas morning so that she could drive around in it. And we opened gifts that morning. She was riding around in the Jeep, and then I noticed, she just didn't seem like she was walking right. She had like a tiptoe gait, and then she started to, have this like projectile vomiting. So, we just loaded her up and took her back to Shands, and they confirmed that the cancer had come back. And this time it had crossed the blood-brain barrier and did some things in the lining of her brain. So, nobody and nothing really prepares you to watch your child suffer in a hospital and fight for her life and then lose the battle. So yeah, that was my heartbreak, that qualified me, I think. That was back in April of 1998, and she was only 4 years old. So that was hard. And, she didn't understand a lot of what happened and relied on her mom, just mommy hold me. And so that love, sustained her, but it wasn't enough to save her. And so when you lose a child, you do learn a few things. And first of all, I realized that, tomorrow isn't promised. And I think at like 30 something, I wasn't exactly sure how I could be okay and happy following a disturbing and painful experience like
That's
losing a
trauma.
child.
I mean, such trauma.
Right.
Wow.
Such terrible,
Yeah.
and somehow I was functioning. I did have another child. I told you, Larissa was only about 6 weeks old, and I was still nursing her. So I would be with one kid in the hospital, one kid at night. I had family members that would come. My aunt came from Chicago. My mother was there with me. So, we really pulled together to, be there for both kids. But I knew that Larissa needed me, and I had a job waiting for me too. So I had a few months of leave, to grieve, but then I was, needing to do some things and get back. So
you had to add work to do. So
yeah, but I didn't really understand, like you were saying, I didn't know how this life experience that I went through would really propel me into my life's work, of teaching others about emotional pain and trauma, and just this whole brain science of rapid change. And then, like, even the LoveStuck population, And that came, I think, more from my own personal experience of how my grieving would be transformed. I didn't take, meds for sleep or anxiety. I didn't have any antidepressant pills or even get hospitalized in the hospital. I was running a psychiatric hospital. So,
right.
And I only mention that because I know that's a place that a lot of people can go when they have stress and trauma. But I mentioned it because a psychotherapist colleague of mine actually said it to me. He said that, he'd be surprised if someone wouldn't be put in a psych ward or heavily medicated after losing a child. He was perhaps putting himself in my shoes and being empathic and sympathetic and compassionate at all.
Yeah.
I thought, okay, but at the same time, I thought, am I missing something? Because I really wasn't that way. I think he was suggesting to me that somehow I needed to be experiencing more pain than I was back then, just trying to deal with everything that was going on.
Right.
And maybe I can continue to be messed up by the past experience today, in the present, if I, didn't understand everything. So that kind of stood out for me. I hear that all the time on the radio too, when, you listen to talk radio and people are talking about grief and losing a child. They're like, okay, you're never going to be the same and you're always going to be, sad. And it's a sad, difficult, painful loss and you can grieve. But I was kind of confused about his comments about you'd be so messed up, you couldn't function. That's kind of more of what it sounded like.
Because there's something about you're always changed. You've had a loss, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's
exactly. Yeah. And then so this other thing happened shortly after I lost Elise. I was in this spontaneous conversation at the dry cleaners with, this time not a colleague of mine, but a high school friend of mine. And I ran into him probably just several months after Elise had died. And when I told him of my loss, he said, wow, you survived that, girl. I mean, now what can't you do or handle in life after an experience like that? I mean, like really. And so he had this profound kind of, amazement. And, it just kind of hit me like, yeah, I never really thought of it that way. Everybody's saying how messed up you're going to be, but that's another way of looking at it.
Right.
Right. But nobody knows what to say. And usually they just tear up, when they hear that it's happened. And of course they feel sorry for me. But, my friend there at the dry cleaners, Gail, he focused on the future and what you get from going through a bad experience, how it can be strength and a source of passion and purpose. Right. If it happened for you, you kind of evolved to a higher level of purpose, and it even strengthened, my spiritual bond. Right. So stressful events, they definitely impact the brain and nervous system in real specific ways. So we aren't always conscious of how our body keeps the score, after traumatic events. And you probably heard the term, the famous Candace Pert, the body is a subconscious mind. And the past can haunt us even in the present, and just the way the brain stores memory on more of an emotional level.
Right. Right.
And I did realize that something was different about my brain and body during and in the aftermath of this, loss of my daughter. But I didn't continue to feel strong emotions about what happened every single day. I was able to, I actually wrote, published a paper for her oncologist because she had become the director of academic medicine. She asked me to review something and write an article. So that was published. And, I was surprisingly calm. And I think most of my brain worked pretty well. I was able to read and write and take care of myself and my family. But what my colleague said to me, that made me curious. And I contrasted it with what Gail, my high school friend, had said. And he wasn't a psychotherapist, but, does this pain event have to determine what people think and feel and do? And is it like this bad thing that happened? Will it then, feel bad forever and always? And and then whenever you think about it. So as I look back, there was more to that whole story of what happened to my brain that set me free to do my life's work and transform my grief and the grief of others and their heartbreak for good. And one of the things that I do recall is that when I went back to work in a hospital, I'm in a big med surg hospital for my work, and I had just spent a year there in a hospital helping my daughter fight the battle that she lost there. But my nervous system, when I got back to work, would jump every time I heard like an emergency call go over the loudspeaker.
Right.
I could feel like I was a little revved up. I felt jumpy and nervous. Even though I knew I was back to work, that let me know I really wasn't totally back.
Right.
Right. The next year, then I had a surprise visit from a mentor of mine. He was actually the person that taught me my first course in clinical hypnosis. And so we went to dinner, and, then he invited me to come back and do something, because he thought, oh, I want to help you with that. So in less than 2 hours, Kamala, I had felt like completely free of pain despite the terrible loss, and how my body's nervous system was doing that, fight flight stuff.
Yeah.
Well,
wow.
It totally was different when I got back to work. So then I got really curious, like what went on during this like life-changing conversation that we had that night at dinner, and how did that 2-hour hypnosis process like totally clear my guilt and grief? That's something, if people think about it, it's not really what happened. It's like, what is your brain still doing with it? And one of the things I recognize is I was in this guilt loop about, oh, woulda, coulda, shoulda. If you'd gone to a different medical center, perhaps they could have treated and helped you release. And things like that were really, ways that I was thinking beyond the terrible event that kept me stuck. And I think that combined with, the being in a hospital and all those bells and whistles going off, that was making me jump like, back into the trauma of being in the hospital there for that year.
Like you almost couldn't get out of the loop.
Well, like it wasn't a choice. It's like, this is an interesting thing that we've now learned all these decades later, because now we understand like the neurobiology of a traumatic experience and memory. I mean, we were doing therapy for years without even knowing what we know today about memory.
Right.
We didn't have like the DSM-5, disorder of post-traumatic stress in its own category. The 1990s, when I went through the experience with Elise, was also named Decade of the Brain, right? So it was just the beginning of being able to view the brain at work, this like EEGs, and looking at brainwave activity, but also the fMRI, having the technologies to see what the brain was doing. And one of the things that so impressed me was Bessel van der Kolk's work, and really his life work that he published a few years ago, This Body Keeps the Score, how emotional or trauma memories are processed and stored in the brain, but also in the body after catastrophic events, right?
Yeah.
So now we get that. I mean, we can't just, do things at this higher level, with our mind. We also have to include the body and the brain science, breakthroughs about, what is trauma? How are these memory impressions of the past keep so very present for people, keep running their body into fight, flight, freeze, flop stuff. And now this exciting new discovery of the use of memory reconsolidation to erase emotional pain from past events. That just really intrigued me, because it turns out like every time we remember something, there's actually an opportunity for our brain, to reconstruct it and then save it as a new save as, like we would a Word document. And we never thought we could do that. We didn't really understand that. Right?
And that's the neuroplasticity, isn't it? It's part of neuroplasticity, but it's also part of like when we sleep every night, we reconsolidate memory.
as we sleep, but there's also different techniques with eye movement reprocessing and neurofeedback and hypnosis and things that where you're in deep sleep relaxation, and you can change the emotional response of the brain. And this is really where we are. It's never a better time in history to really be helping people with traumatic events.
Yeah.
So they keep the knowledge. This is not amnesia. Like, you're going to remember, but what we're able to do is update the lower brain that runs the body at more of this emotional brain, and change the pain responses, the survival response, fight, flight, freeze, flop, that was previously linked to the experience, so that it's not running you, like that it can be updated. And I think back, like in the 90s when I was at this Ivy League, internship, well, we didn't even really talk that much about trauma. It was hardly mentioned.
Right.
And then, here we are in the decade of the brain, and now all these years later, 20, 30 years. So that really inspired me to help others and illuminate, what needs to happen for clients when they experience transformations. What are we doing with this information? How are we changing the brain? Right? What's like the neuropsychology behind what makes people suffer less pain and misery, right?
Yeah.
So I felt so fortunate that my mentor, who it doesn't even get into the brain science, but he could do something to help me feel something I hadn't felt since the event. And that was actually a profound connection to Elise.
Yeah. Oh.
Right. And a true emotional freedom from a tragic loss that really had impacted my brain and nervous system. And, by association was connected to all the sounds in a hospital. Who would have thought that my brain had stored it that way?
Right.
But I wanted to understand, well, why could I feel this good while others insisted on the model that pain and mourning and grief was necessary. They talk about, the Kubler-Ross stages have been applied to everything from, losing, a loved one to losing a job, that you have to go through stages. And of course, the stages aren't linear, they can change, right?
Around and around.
But, it's a helpful model for a lot of people. But I knew something else could be done for people, right? And that I could be okay and be living fully in the present moment and experience a calm state, even thrive after traumatic events, including those painful losses. So that's kind of my personal pain story, how I think it evolved, because not only did I have the scientific background, I could tell the difference in the way that my brain worked and ran my body after the experience. My mind was clear. Emotionally, I felt calm relief and freedom. I had a vision for myself and an understanding in a new way about some of these internal experiences, how I related to my thoughts, my stories, that I would say things to myself about, woulda, shoulda, couldas, and right. And so I was able to see the value of this experience, for other people too. Right. So that, I think, is the reason I'm doing this. I want to know what is this calmness that I felt at my core? Is this our, spiritual nature? Is this really what the divine, God wanted for humans, that we could use our brain in such a way that we could live without tremendous ongoing pain? That enabled me to kind of share the peace and connectedness with others during their painful life stories. I mean, you got to meet people where they're at. And I think most people are going to have a lot of pain, but with the neuroscience of change and transformation, more can be done than people even realize.
Right.
Yeah.
And I love that, because I think there is some value to the going through the emotional grieving process.
Yeah.
And at some point, maybe there's a switch we can flip, or a side street we can take that will lead us to the next phase of our life, where we don't have to stay in the suffering. There's one of my devotionals says something about pain is inevitable, suffering is optional. So it feels like isn't that beautiful? It's like,
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And to be able to connect with someone like you who's doing this work, and really, because you're training psychotherapists and other mental health professionals. So that wave, or those ripples, can go out and out and
Absolutely.
out.
That was really my vision. It was like an exponential, like I can only see, I mean, I could probably on a busy day see 9 or 10 clients. But if I'm trained 10 therapists and they did that, I could reach hundreds and thousands and, all over the world, because people have come from, the UK and Canada and Virgin Islands and Greece and South Africa. So it's really helping me, see it as it's expanding and ever growing. And yet it's really, it's in its infancy. Or, we're learning a lot about what's going on in the brain, but then what do we tell people to do, to help themselves? Like what I'm teaching with the LoveStuck is a self-help model, like you can change your brain. And also working with people more one-on-one, having them connect with therapists that know how to do this work, where we do more reprocessing. And like you said, it's essential that we open the brain's emotional pain response. Like we're not doing this just top down, thinking about it differently. We want to have the brain, start the emotional pain response so that it can be altered. Right. So it has to be open, right? I can't just tell you you're going to be okay. I have to, do things that change how the brain is processing information and then storing the memory. So,
yeah. And really developing the skills to be able to do this, this processing.
Exactly. Yeah. Right. But it gives a very credible explanation, for the problem, and then solutions, and sometimes even resolutions, because it takes place very quickly. Like for me, it was a less than 2-hour session, and I'm doing that a lot for other people. And that, I schedule a 2-hour call, and we can usually do a lot of the transformational change, once they have a brain-based understanding of what's going on. It makes sense to them. We're not really guessing and giving interpretations. It kind of connects back to, what are you feeling in your body right now has a lot to do with whatever emotions turned on. And that wasn't your choice or decision. That's just what the brain turned on based on probably things in the network of past experience. Right.
Yeah. And so we need to have another conversation, because sure. That attachment, some of our responses could have started when we were less than 3 years old, and that what you would study in college. It's like, that's fascinating to me.
Well, and what's even more fascinating is, so less than 3 years old means that the hippocampus, one of the areas of the brain that helps us even store long-term or conscious memory, it's not fully developed.
Right.
So these are really non-conscious memories. And so this is where the techniques that I love to use are not just talk-only therapy. And, they get to really where in the brain things are stored, and it's much more non-conscious, subconscious than conscious, right? And that's really running the show. And so when you can give people, a way to have their hand on the control knob of automatic experience and this involuntary stuff, because you can't outthink it. You really have to learn to do things.
Oh, if we could.
Yeah, it would be great, right? But I just really, the life's work was, I knew firsthand what's needed to get unstuck and out of emotional pain cycles and fully recover and thrive. And so now I have just this vision that let's share more brain-based system to help others heal and transform their emotional pain for good. And the love stories here that people are not having because they're still stuck on, the past.
Yeah.
I don't know what to
and
do.
it's earlier today I was just thinking of one of those things that happened about this time 35 years ago or something. And, I got dumped at Christmas time and I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. It was just like, I was a mess. And one of my girlfriends, I was just like all in myself, and I had a little boy at the time, and I wasn't even getting a Christmas tree. And my girlfriend came over, it's like shaking me. It's like, you have to get out and get your kid a Christmas tree at the very least. Just like, not get over yourself, but snap out of it a little bit. This guy.
I know, but that really wasn't you. It was something your brain was doing. Yeah. We know that now because we can see the fMRI studies of the brain and heartbreak. Helen Fisher, great. She's done a lot of the pioneering work on that. And so, we're hijacked. I don't know if you know this brain model where it's like flipping the lid. Right. Yeah. Like, so if this is your whole brain power, here's a brain. I always show people brain. And so this is our prefrontal cortex. Well, that kind of goes offline. So you're like flipping your lid when stuff like that happens. And we need a prefrontal cortex. It tells time. It helps us set intentions and make plans and the specific actions, steps to go about doing things, like you said, from putting up a Christmas tree to putting a car seat in the car, or just daily tasks like taking a shower or, feeding the pets. Like a lot of that stuff can really be, shut down in heartbreak mode. So I appreciate that. Also, interesting kind of trivia, 2 times a year, highest times for breakups right before Christmas, December 12th. Kind of yesterday, and then up until Christmas, and same thing for Valentine's Day.
Yeah.
Right.
So, makes sense, right?
Yeah, makes sense. It's like, because we're looking at, buying people gifts, making commitments. Are we really a couple? And so it's kind of weed out time.
Right.
Is this going to happen or not? So.
And I know that I'm not quite sure where do we want to go? Do we want to talk a little bit more about LoveStuck and love in that way? Or I know you have something about neuroplasticity on your website, and these times of, one, we're near the holidays. We've been in this pandemic. There's just like so much. So where would you like to go with this?
Well, and that's what I thought, given the time of year and everything, I thought I do have this neuroplasticity for stress management, like a PDF, right? So it's an introduction to how we use neuroplasticity for different stress. And it is more of this bottom-up approach, to looking at what's going on. And I was going to just give you guys that. You could put the link up and people could review.
Yeah.
What,
that would be great, because it's, I think everybody our stress levels are just way up,
through the roof. I do a lot of training for psychotherapists, and I put out a poll, like, what do you most want to hear about? Like burnout and burnout was number 1. It's like, really this time of year, everyone is supposed to feel good. And yet we're on the second, Christmas with the pandemic, and lots of things have changed, and there have been lots of losses. Lots of people lost loved ones, and millions of people perished in the pandemic.
And I know all the therapists I know, counselors, therapists, mental health workers, their calendars are full because so many people are so stressed. So it really is just the pandemic, and then the stress and everything else. So overwhelm for sure.
Right. So if we don't have a way to sort of interrupt that and kind of reset, just like I needed to be reset from the bells and whistles at the hospital. These aren't, you're not in any danger. There's nothing to do about Elise, this to really just ground back to present moment calm and have some tools and techniques for that. And that's what I cover in that. I mean, simple stuff like, one of the ways that the brain and body are connected is through the vagus nerve, the 10th cranial nerve, right? And so that's running our eyes, things that we hear, and, the larynx, throat, the heart. So when we exercise, that can influence vagal tone and then just breathing. So I always say, put one hand on the belly, one hand on the chest, and then breathe so that your bottom hand moves.
Yes.
Right. So focus on that more diaphragmatic, slow breath, and just release all the air, like let it go.
I love that.
Right. And then so the more we focus, that really helps the brain stop processing, and, you're attuning to the body. So you get like a little mental break.
Yes.
A little respite. And it clears the mind. And the more you practice it, the easier it becomes. Our brain is so adaptive and smart that if you're doing that a few times a day, it starts to learn that, hey, when I put my hand on my belly, it's a signal for calm.
Right.
And so it's easier with neuroplasticity to return back to the state again and again.
Yeah.
Right. But you want to install it before you're trying to use it when you're in the middle of, a panic attack or something.
Yeah, exactly.
There are ways to deal with extreme emotions. But I'm just saying, make sure, like you said, take a moment that you're fully grounded, right, into I'm here right now. Because when you're in the present moment, the way our brain works is it processes more, the same way versus emotions are doing this thing and automatic thinking is doing this thing. And we don't have, access to our smart brain.
Right. Right.
I want to get everybody really smart and understanding conscious love. I mean, that's another thing I'm going to be talking about in the book is a state, well, really an experience of, love. And we talk about love, but love, it looks like in the brain looks very much like an addiction. The brain learns that somebody was good for you and it doesn't update. Right.
Yeah.
So that I want to create like a new, where we're going is like this higher level, let's call it love. Right. Like that you're understanding at the highest level of what love is. Yeah. For you, calm, optimal, strategic, caring for the purpose, for the person, highest values, and right. And that we can get to that higher level and find someone who's there too. And then it's so easy to be in love. I mean, what we really struggle with is we're mainly in these more non-conscious systems, and that's not as good as love. So I'm going to be sharing a lot about how to use your top brain to create future love.
Great. So you'll come back.
I will absolutely come back. Like I said, I could talk on and on. I love this topic. And I think it's so helpful for people. I mean, the people that I work with really experience very accelerated healing because we are working on healing the brain to mend the heart, which is a different approach, not waiting for time to heal. We're not going through the Kubler-Ross stages of grief because they're out there. We want to find out what's going on with people, brain, body, and get their mind working so that they can thrive in life and love. Absolutely.
Yeah. So, and that's so important because our brains are miracle machines,
They are.
And to be able to use them more effectively. And they're a gift.
And you're a spiritual teacher. So I just don't think, I really think that, divine wisdom, power, we have much more ability to create things than what we're doing because we don't have full access to the highest part of our brain.
Exactly.
Exactly. Yeah.
Which is such a gift. So anyway, that's about all the time we have for today, but thank you so much, Elizabeth, for being with us. And just, I'm sure the listeners are going to love this and I bet we can't wait for you to come back.
Yeah.
So, all right, everyone, thank you for listening. Such a pleasure to have you all. And yeah, thank you. Until next time. Bye for now.
All right. Bye-bye.
So there you have it, a little heart and chutzpah for the day. Today, give yourself a little permission to be both big-hearted and a little feisty, just like you were created to be. Thank you for joining me. I hope you'll reach out to me via social media at Kamala Murphy, and it's Murphy with an EY, or at my website, kamalamurphy.com. Again, thank you for joining me. Many blessings. Until next time. Bye for now.